Congressman, great to see you as always.
John, thanks for having me on.
All right, so what do you say to Mitch McConnell if you're passing him in the hallway? I know this would never really happen in a scenario like this, but there are some serious questions. He's the minority leader, GOP leader of the Senate, and he and these 7 other GOP senators that voted to convict President Trump. There are some serious questions about how the party can even work together now.
Well, 2 overriding thoughts, John. Number 1 is that disagreement within the Republican Party is normal. We are the big tent party. We are the party of ideas. And so when you have so many different viewpoints, you're going to have debate. You're going to have disagreements. But that's ultimately a good thing for the Republican Party and for the American people to have a party of ideas that's all-inclusive. Now, within the Republican Party, what we have to do is we have to focus on exposing the far-left socialist agenda of Joe Biden and the other radicals. The more time we spend attacking each other, the less time we have showing the American people and explaining to the American people that we are heading down a path towards socialism, and we've got to stop that and take back the House in 22 and the Senate, and then obviously the White House in 2024. So it's time for us to start attacking the policies of Joe Biden, not each other.
Right. And you hear this emerging, I think, kind of if you read between the lines and the talking points, it's the America First agenda, right? That's what we're talking about. It's not so much President Trump, but it's the American First agenda that he really kind of laid the groundwork for. And if the Republican Party wants to focus on those policy issues and not so much on personalities, but doing the work of the American people, keeping government small, shrinking taxes, getting government out of our paychecks and off our backs, those are the kinds of things that are going to unite the party, right?
Exactly. The Trump agenda, the MAGA agenda, is here to stay. We are truly now the party of the Trump platform. Whether or not President Trump wants to have any part in it or to what extent he has in it, his imprint is here to stay at least for the next 10 or 20 years. I truly believe his impact has been that great. And it's a great platform. It's a strong America abroad that still tries to avoid conflicts when we don't have to. It's putting the American worker first. It's about holding China accountable. And we had one of the hottest economies in the history of the United States. It was particularly good for blue-collar workers and minority workers. This is something we can all get behind. We should remind the American people about Trump's achievements and campaign on that in 22. I still think we take the House and the Senate back in 22. And if President Trump wants to run in 2024, he's going to win. Because I can tell you, John, the guy who is fracking in South Dakota and Western Pennsylvania, the fact that he believed that Joe Biden was not going to declare a war on oil and gas, day number 1, right. He saw immediately that Joe Biden is not putting the American worker first, and that was going to be the downfall of Biden and Harris.
Right. Jobs, getting kids back in school, those are the types of things that, a lot of America remembers from the Trump years, and they look back on this fondly. Let's talk a little bit more, though, about Bill Cassidy and Richard Burr. I want to focus specifically on what Cassidy said about the way he voted. Here he is.
I had the privilege of having the facts before me and being able to spend several days deeply going into those facts. As these facts become more and more out there, if you will, and folks have a chance to look for themselves, more folks will move to where I was. People want to trust. They want to trust their leaders. They want people to be held accountable. Now, I'm attempting to hold President Trump accountable. And that is the trust I have from the people that elected me. And I am very confident that as time passes, people will move to that position.
Okay, a couple things about this. First, do you agree with him that over time more people will move to this position where he is?
No, I don't. I think that as time unfolds, we're going to see that a lot of the acts that happened on January 6th were premeditated acts. So unless President Trump was a time traveler, he could not have incited people to prep to attack the Capitol building days before. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous. Also, John, if you think about it, the fact that these senators went along with this highly political and partisan move, it scares me because due process was not involved in this trial or this impeachment. The Senate didn't even hear witnesses. The House didn't have any investigation. They rushed it through the Rules Committee, which I sit on. So that should scare everybody. And Senator Graham said it best over the weekend. He said the Democrats have opened Pandora's box because when we take back the House in 22, we can then impeach Vice President Kamala Harris for her involvement in bailing out those that were violently rioting and looting during the so-called Summer of Love. That the door is open. And we can expand that also to people like Tlaib and Omar, who've said incredibly dangerous and frankly anti-Semitic things.
Congressman,
when the Democrats had
is that seriously what you're talking about going on down the list? Vice presidents, members of Congress? Is it going to be, impeachment after impeachment if you guys take back control of the House?
Well, two quick thoughts. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but I will say that Pandora's box has been open. To paraphrase Senator Graham, we've lowered the bar for impeachment so low that it's now merely a partisan exercise, no due process, no investigations, no witnesses. That should scare everybody. And if we just take a step back, this does not bode well for the future of America. What we saw in the second impeachment of President Trump is cancel culture on steroids. And if they can go after President Trump, if they went after him yesterday, if they went after Marjorie Taylor Greene last week, what's to stop the mob from going after you? And you might think that I'm being dramatic, but it is cancel culture when your daughter doesn't get into the school of her choice because there's pictures of her at a Trump rally. And when you don't get a promotion because you're a registered Republican and the corporation is selecting Democrats to fill their upper echelons, that's cancel culture. This is very real. The Democrats have made it a reality on Capitol Hill, and it's coming to everyday Americans on Main Street.
But this is why this is true, and this is why people started raising the warning flags when they started tearing down Confederate statues, because that was, everybody could say, oh, these are bad guys, the statues should come down, but that's the inroads they started to make.
The mob will come for us all, John.
They will. They will. Real quickly, though, censuring a lawmaker sometimes is seen as that's old school cancel culture, right? That's what it's supposed to have the effect. But Nancy Pelosi was asked about censuring President Trump, and here's what she had to say.
Oh, these cowardly senators who couldn't face up to what the president did and what was at stake for our country are now going to have a chance to give a little slap on the wrist. We censure people for using stationery for the wrong purpose. We don't censure people for inciting insurrection that kills people in the Capitol.
It's amazing, Guy, to kind of listen to the logic and reasoning that Democrats are using to try and justify and say that this was actually worth it. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to censure President Trump. She says it's a slap on the wrist here. But, why did they go through this whole entire process if they knew at the end they didn't have the votes to get the conviction?
Well, they did it because their coalition is incredibly fractured, and we on the right oftentimes forget that. There's not a lot in common with their different interest groups that they've cobbled together. So they need to have opposition to keep their coalition together. They're also beholden to their far-left radical and rabid base who demanded a second impeachment. So instead of focusing on issues that would unite us and that could work around, the Democrats from day one decided to divide us. And Nancy Pelosi calling Republicans coward. The cowardly act is not removing people from committees, especially Omar, who sits on that Foreign Affairs Committee. We're not removing her when she says anti-Semitic remarks or taking actions against Tlaib when she retweets things like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which in essence calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. And of course, you still have Eric Swalwell sitting on the House Intel Committee after he's been compromised by a Chinese spy. So those are the acts of cowardice. So if Nancy Pelosi wants to point fingers, she should look in the mirror for some of her hypocrisy and cowardice that I've seen over the last few years from her.
And specifically on Ilhan Omar, who you referenced there, she was just promoted to the vice chairwoman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa and Global Human Rights Issues, a promotion where Marjorie Taylor Greene gets stripped of all her committee assignments. And that just goes to show you, some of this stuff I think is done, Guy, for effect. They don't want to really, some of them don't really want to convict President Trump. What they want to do is use this, and you're hearing this talking point today, that we can't get the 60 votes needed to convict President Trump, so we got to get rid of the filibuster. And they're right back to this conversation.
Right. Well, the Democrats will exploit any crisis to expand and consolidate their own power. But the fact that Omar was elevated to a leadership position on foreign affairs after repeatedly engaging in anti-Semitic tropes, after repeatedly engaging in anti-Semitic rhetoric is scary. And also, why is the press, why is the mainstream media not asking Joe Biden if he has had contact with the Israeli prime minister yet? Why is that? Why is the mainstream media
they got to figure out first if Israel's an ally first. They got to answer that question first. There are strategic intra-group policies, discussions, or whatever the lexicon that they use over there at the White House. Right over my head. You know, it's not a hard question, not a trick question. At least it used to not be before the inauguration. Is Israel an ally? Anyway, hard to know these days with the press secretary. Guy Reschenthaler, thanks so much. Congressman, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.